good. Morena koutou. Yeah, I don't know where to start. I've done a lot of presentations over the few years, but today I just feel extra nervous for some reason. I think it's because of the kōrero that I'm going to share is a bit more than my journey as a nurse. It's a bit more than my journey in my mahi. And as Heidi said, that we've been friends for a good 30 years. So she knows me really well and knows my journey. And this is actually the first time I'm going to share it in a more personal sense. But just a little bit about me is I whakapapa to Ngāti Parau, te atanga maha ki te uri o hei Ngāti Whātua, Ngāpuhi and Ngai Takoto. I also have Indian heritage. I was born and bred in Gisborne, so between Gisborne and Aotearoa, where my dad is from, up the top of the east coast. My mum is from north of Auckland. She was brought up on the Kaipara Harbour, just out of Kaiwaka. And yeah, I've been living in the Waikato for probably 18, nearly 20 years or so. But I've just spent a bit of time back down in Gisborne because my mum hasn't been very well. So I'm just on a little break back to the Waikato to do some mahi while my mum's sisters are on deck, and then I'll go back to Gizzy and then just be there for a little bit. But I do have a presentation. It is an honour to be able to share because September is around Cervical Screening Month, Gynecological Awareness Month, which is very passionate to my heart. And so I'll just share the screen and hopefully you can see everything. I'll just check with Heidi. You can see that first screen, Heidi?
Yep, all good.
Yep. Oh, kapai. So I want to just talk about survivorship screening and shaping Hauora, because to me, it brings in a whole lot of context. And like I said before, I'm going to share a bit more than just my mahi and just where I am now. So it is a little bit raw. It is a little bit sensitive. That's why Heidi said that she'll turn her screen off because she might have a tangi. That's why we call Auntie Heidi Auntie Cridy sometimes. But so I've just got some key points just as I share the slides. So, as you listen, I invite you to reflect on what survivorship means to you. It might be your own journey or someone you know, but I want you to hold that whakaaro as we go along. But thank you for allowing me to share my story with you today, because it's not an easy kōrero, but it's an honest one. It's about violence, it's about trauma, it's about survival, but it's also about aroha, healing, whānau, and reclaiming life. I'm going to be pretty raw and real as much as possible, knowing, that when we go through hardships in life, we're not victims, we're warriors and we're survivors. Many times it's not a tidy process. It can be really messy, but it's also really powerful. And I don't want to share the story for pity or sympathy. I really want to share it for awareness, for truth, and for hope, because you may be going through something, you may know someone who's going through something, or just that you don't hear the stories and you can never tell what someone's gone through unless they tell you their own story. So living with violence, I'll start there, the hardest part. When you hear about violence, what comes to your mind first? Is it the broken bones? Is it the bruises? Or is it about the invisible scars, that fear, losing your freedom, and the silencing of your voice? And, survivorship means holding both in many ways. For several years in my early 30s, my life behind closed doors was ruled by violence and fear. I went into a relationship with somebody quite quickly, and I guess that should have been a red flag at the beginning, but I didn't know. And I was with that person for 3 years. Not a long time, but in a way it was a long time, because 3 years, can go through a whole lot can happen in that time. And fear So it's not the kind of fear you get from like a scary movie or anything. It's the kind of fear that changes how you walk, how you breathe, and how you think. I learned to measure the weight of footsteps, you know, the slamming of a door and the silence before the storm. Domestic violence, that's the situation I was in. And it wasn't just about bruises. It was about stripping away my confidence and my self-worth and my freedom. It was really tough. I didn't want anyone to know because I was whakama and I didn't want to burden anybody with what I was going through. So, and I also kind of undervalued it in a way to be, you know, I was like, I never ended up in hospital. We've all seen Once a Warriors. I was like, oh, it's not that bad. But when I reflect on it, it doesn't matter what kind of abuse you go through, any abuse is not good. It was the constant walking on eggshells. It's the sound of that car pulling up in the driveway and your heart racing. It's learning how to breathe quietly so you don't set them off. It's been called all the names under the sun. It's been called useless so many times that you start to believe it. It's apologizing for things that you never did. You're always at fault. It's losing yourself bit by bit until one day you don't recognize that woman in the mirror. There was a lot of physical violence and there was a lot of abuse pretty much in every realm. I remember being strangled until my vision blurred, being punched and kicked, locked out of the house, blocking me from leaving, throwing the dinner off the stove. Like real whack stuff. He did things to me that left scars on my body and deeper scars on my wairua. But I stayed. I stayed because I was embarrassed that this was happening and I was hopeful that things would change. People would ask, you know, even after the fact, why don't you just leave? But leaving isn't easy. Leaving is when you're at most risk of being killed. Leaving means weighing up your safety, your money, your kids, and your fear. It was tough. It was tough to kind of think about all these things and be in that situation. I had gone to EAP for some, you know, support. And every time I'd been, probably about 3 times in that 3 years that I was with him, each one had said to me, we need to give you an exit plan. But I still stayed. Eventually I did leave. And after his antics continued into another relationship, I was dragged into the High Court. Well, not dragged into the High Court. It was my choice, but I chose to do it because he wasn't changing and more women and families were being damaged. I'm sharing this. It was actually in the stuff. So, you know, his name is there. It's public. The High Court is not a healing place for survivors. It's ugly. I had to go through testifying for things. I had to be interviewed. I had to remember places, names. I had to write diagrams, dates, everything that could, you know, help form a case against him. So I had to relive everything again. And the cross-examination wasn't all about truth. It was about kind of, you know, tearing you down because that's how the court system works. But I grew a bit of a backbone during that process and I held my ground. And in the end, he was sentenced to 19 years. So 5 of us over those years, 49 charges between so many years and given a 19-year sentence with a minimum parole period of 9 years. But you think that was the end after he was sentenced, but it wasn't, because things don't end with sentencing. It just carried on through, oh, he's coming up for parole. You're on the victim notification, you know, register. You're getting emails and, you know, contacts and things like that. So parole hearings was a big thing as it kind of came to the last, especially in the last 3 years, you know, right up until just the other week. about him being on parole. So he'd done about 12 years or so, and then he was brought up for parole at the end of last year. And he got released, but within about a month he breached, and so he's been back in since just before Christmas last year. He had another parole hearing just recently and was declined. But again, it's like, well, his next parole hearing's coming up in October, so it never really ends. You're always getting reminded. Even though for me, this happened many years ago, you know, those things when they go through the system, they're still just really raw. And again, I want to share this because it's like with the parole hearings coming up, it's also other things that the system doesn't really help you with or think about you as a person and your emotions, because there was at one point about 3 years ago, there was a notice of payment that we could apply for $3,000 that had gone into his account. But the process for that was shit. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh, cool, $3,000. But you don't get $3,000. It's that you have to apply for like, and fill out a form for all these different things. So this, I never ended up filling this out, but I just wanted to show you that, you know, as a survivor, if something comes up like this, in the compensation that they say that you could get isn't actually there. And I had to go through and say, well, this is the damage for loss of like property, for loss of emotional, you know, stress and stuff. And for 3K to give a monetary factor to that, I was like, what a joke. So I was thinking, I really need to, you know, it was worth $5 million, not $3,000. And then you have to recall all the different things. It was like, what, you know, the name, the offences, the claim things, the convictions. I was like, I shouldn't have to do this. So, you know, all these trigger points happen for us and they suck. I wrote a complaint. I got a response. Wasn't very helpful. And then I didn't apply, and they give you 6 months to apply. And I was like triggered by it. I wrote a complaint, and then I thought, oh, shivers, now I feel a little bit stronger to do that. But I missed the deadline, and it was only by a week or two. And then I said, look, I've missed the deadline. Can I still apply? It said, sorry, you can't. We can't accept claims filed after that 6-month deadline. So, you know, it's ongoing. It's like walking with a shadow that sometimes gets heavier, sometimes lighter, but it never disappears. So then you live with the trauma. So, you know, thinking about times you felt unsafe, how did you feel? You know, does your heart race, that adrenaline kicks in, you get sweaty palms, you know, you feel that tension, you know, building up. And living with PTSD is like having that every day, even though you're safe. You've got that kind of background, like fight or flight happening, because I carried scars, you know, afterwards until today that no one can see. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I had panic attacks that would hit out of nowhere. You know, it could be a smell, you know, a slammed door, a crowded space. My nervous system was always braced, even when I felt safe. And to this day, long distance driving freaks me out, because my first panic attack happened while I was driving, and I was actually driving to Heidi's house from Waikato to Rotorua, and she picked me up because it just came out of nowhere and I thought I was having a heart attack. On some days I managed really well. Most days I managed really well. On other days I felt just really tired. So healing along this journey, you know, isn't linear. Some mornings I wake up super determined, motivated, and other days I just really don't want to get out of bed. You know, when you think about healing and survivorship, it's not about getting over it. It's about learning to live with it one day at a time. But what saved me? What saved me was my whānau. My whānau became my anchor when I felt out of whack. My parents, my daughter, my besties, my loved ones, they held me when I couldn't hold myself. And I didn't tell them what was going on when it all happened, but without them, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I got to know, and we got to remember it's never a solo journey. And in hindsight, you know, I should have reached out a lot earlier, but I didn't. But I'm so glad that my whānau and my loved ones were there behind me when I needed it. So I share photos of my parents' wedding. My parents have been married for 55 years this year. The photo with them, May 1970, they got married in Te Paunga at Kaiwaka. My grandparents, my dad's parents, Guy and Helen Goldsmith, and my mum's parents, Connie and Taki Marsden, no longer with us, you know, our tinana, but they're always with us, our wairua. And then came aroha in a different form when I met my husband. I met him 13 years ago. The most patient, gentle, kind, this man. I gave him shit when we first, you know, started dating because I had my back up and I just thought things were going to go wrong, but he held in there, luckily. And it's proof that love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't control and love doesn't break you down. It builds you back up. So we'd been married for 9 years coming up this December. And these connections, you know, they don't fully erase my trauma, but they help carry me through it. You know, I don't forget things like, you know, when I said that you get those triggers, they still happen, but it's much more bearable now. And it's finding the people who make carrying that weight possible. So rebuilding my identity and purpose, what gave me purpose again was nursing. I had to reclaim not just my safety and my identity. I had to, you know, what was my purpose in life, and it was nursing gave me that. It gave me a way to turn my pain into service, to sit with people and their struggles, to offer care, dignity, compassion, empathy, the very things I fought to reclaim in my own life, and to bring back that sparkle in my eyes. Because I had started my nursing studies before I had gone into that relationship, but then I had to stop because I wasn't supported and things just didn't work out at that time. So I did stop for a little while, and then I returned and I finished all through when that court case was going. And then I worked in primary care, then I worked in secondary care, and then I worked in some national health roles. And each step helped rebuild my confidence, my sense of self, my belief that I was more than what I had survived. And I worked my butt off because I had lost those 3 years, and I felt like I needed to catch up. But PTSD, you know, didn't vanish along those ways. Panic attacks still happened, and they travel with you. The difference is that I learned to live with them, not be defined by them. So what does reclaiming your groove look like for you? It doesn't have to be perfect. Mine definitely wasn't, and I'm still going through it now. It can be messy, loud, painful, hopeful, often all in one day, but it's a choice every single day. It's not a medal you get at the end of the race. It's a daily act of choosing to live. And it's knowing my triggers and managing them. It's acknowledging my scars, but refusing to be reduced to them. It's honoring my past while choosing a different future. And for those 3 years I lost, I felt a need to catch up. And I really busted my ass over the last 15 or so years. So much so that I burnt out last year. My body caught up with me. And I actually ended up in ED last year thinking I was having a heart attack. My self-care started to become a bit non-existent. Things like not even brushing my hair or doing, you know, showering every day, to be honest. I'd put on 20 kilos. I was working crazy hours, and I didn't say no to stuff that was work-related, but I was saying no to socializing and being with my loved ones, which I used to love. So what I did was I quit my job. I was working at the Ministry of Health. I quit my job and I thought, I got to realign myself. I'm hitting 50 soon, so, I can't be living like this. I'm still working through how to balance my life better. But today, I can proudly say I stand here as a mother, a wife, a daughter, an auntie, cousin, niece, friend, a nurse, and a wāhine Māori, and a survivor. Surviving for me also means using my voice for others. That's why I became the cervical screening so closely and the kaupapa of SME or MEA. I'm luckily enough to be on the SME or MEA Trust Board, which was born from the courage of Tale, the late Tale Morrison, who was a powerhouse performer, intelligent, dynamic, phenomenal wāhine, who turned her own cervical cancer diagnosis into a call to action for wāhine Māori. Tale's life was cut short, but her kaupapa lives on. And every time I stand in this space, I carry her vision. Because cervical cancer is preventable, screening saves lives, yet wāhine Māori are still underscreened and still overrepresented in late-stage diagnoses. I've even known of 2 wāhine within the last year or 2 that have died from cervical cancer from not being screened. And with that overrepresentation in late-stage diagnoses and, not screening, it's not because we don't care. It's because the system wasn't designed for us. And that's why Tale started this Me or Me, because she didn't realize the importance of screening until it was too late. And in my role, I've sat with wāhine and whānau, I've laughed and I've cried. And sadly, I've been with some whānau who are grieving because the cancer was caught too late. And these are reasons why I became a nurse, why I then became a smear taker, and why I'm now moving into being a researcher to build up our whakapapa protection. So for me, I check up on all my whānau and friends about their screening in Hauora. As I said at the beginning, September is Cervical Screening Awareness Month. Breast screening is October, etc., etc. Although in reality, they're every day and every month, not just these particular months. So I ask you in your whānau, have you had your smear and have you checked in on your hauora and the hauora of your loved ones? If not, why not? It's one of the best things we can do for ourselves and our whakapapa. And 2 years ago today, funnily enough, on the 12th of September 2023, New Zealand launched the HPV self-testing as a self-swab, as a test to see if we need a smear. So it's a lot less invasive, but a lot of our wāhine don't know that it's available. And that's the message that we want to bring out, is that the self-test is here. It's an option, and it is better to have, a lot of more open to having a self-test than a smear. But then we can have those more kōrero about, if this test does come back with something, that the smear is the next step, and we're kind of, making that awareness a bit more highlighted. We also have the HPV vaccination, which a lot of us are a bit older, too old to have had, because it got launched in New Zealand in 2009. But our young ones can have the HPV vaccination for free, boys and girls. And it doesn't just prevent against cervical cancer, it prevents against vaginal, vulval, anal, penile, and head and neck cancers. They can start from the age of 9, but they give it in school when they're in year 8. But it's also free up until they turn 26. So for anyone who doesn't have it at school or missed it, they can still have it for free up until that age. After that age, or up to age 45, they can still get it, but it's at cost, and it costs about $600 for the 3 doses. So that's why it's important to know what the vaccine is about and to get our young ones vaccinated if that's something that that you're unaware about. And then from the age of 25, we continue on to screening, so cervical screening. So now the HPV self-test, as I mentioned, and all the smear. And it's free for most. It's free for Māori and Pacific in New Zealand. It's also free if you need a follow-up test. If you're being charged at your GP practice, you shouldn't be. Unfortunately, it's not a fully funded program for everyone, but we keep pushing. I'm part of the cervical cancer elimination team as well in New Zealand because we don't have a strategy yet, but working along the likes of Bev Lawton and others to make sure that we have one in place, and we keep pushing for a fully funded program. Because at the end of the day, we don't want another tale to raise the awareness. We've got to do it now. So from all this passion I've talked about, from my journey and everything like that, it's led me into doing my PhD. I started this year. I'm working part-time, not full-time. I'm starting to say no more to, to work things. I got to protect myself to be able to protect others, to protect the whakapapa, etc., and my sanity. My research asks, how valuable and mana enhancing are current cancer screening programs for Māori, for whānau? If screening doesn't feel safe, if it doesn't uplift our mana, if it doesn't reflect us as Māori, then it's just not good enough. We talk about equity, but true equity won't come from tinkering around the edges. It requires transformation. By Māori, for Māori. And this too is survivorship in this lens. Taking pain and transforming it into purpose. Refusing to let silence win, and refusing to let systems keep failing our people. So when I reflect on my journey, I see more than survival. I see resilience. I see how I've grown a backbone. I see the power of whānau. I see the strength of aroha, and I see the responsibility of telling my story. It's not easy to tell the story, but because silence keeps people trapped, and silence at the end of the day can kill a lot of our whānau. It's not a neat, clean journey. It's not a quick journey, but everything is possible. And if there's one message I want to leave with you, it's this. We are never what has happened to us. We are what we reclaim, what we rebuild, and who we choose to become. That's my end of my slides.
Yeah.
So yeah, but thank you for letting me share, because it was really an honor, and thank you for hopefully I didn't bore you, and it was, I've given you some good kōrero.
Thank you, Nadine. Have a good weekend, rest of the Friday, everyone, and good weekends.
Ka kite.
Ka kite.